Welcome to Quiet Car Stories. In this video, we'll take a slow and relaxing journey through the history of cars, engines, and the quiet details of automotive engineering. If you enjoy calm storytelling and gentle explanations, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps support these kinds of long-form, relaxing documentaries. You're welcome to simply sit back and listen. Whether you're here to learn something new, unwind after a long day, or even drift off to sleep, these stories are made to be enjoyed quietly at your own pace. So find a comfortable position, settle in, and let the sound of the story carry you. Let's begin. If you were to stand by the edge of a quiet road as the evening settles and simply watch the cars pass by in the fading light, you might notice something peaceful yet profoundly uniform. As the headlights cut through the dusk, the silhouettes that follow them are smooth. They are rounded. They flow into one another like stones that have been worn down by the steady, patient current of a river. If you look closely at a modern parking lot on a misty morning, the sharp edges of the past are entirely gone. The sedans, the hatchbacks, the crossovers, they all share a familiar curve, a teardrop of glass and steel slipping through the air. It is a common observation. People often say that modern cars all look the same. They say that the distinct, unmistakable character of the 20th century has slowly faded into a singular, unified shape. But this uniformity is not born from a lack of imagination. It is not a loss of creativity in the quiet design studios of the world. Rather, it is the result of a long, deliberate conversation between human engineering and the fundamental laws of nature. It is the story of physics, of safety, and of an endless pursuit of harmony with the air around us. To understand why our modern machines share this singular flowing shape, we must first look back to a time when the world moved at a much slower pace. We must travel back to the very origins of the automobile, a time when the wind was simply something that blew against your face, not a force that dictated the curve of a fender. In the earliest days of motoring, at the dawn of the 1900s, cars were not sculpted, they were built. They were constructed with the same logic as the horse-drawn carriages they were designed to replace. They were tall, they were upright, they possessed flat, vertical windshields that stood proudly against the elements, and large, prominent grilles that served as ornate monuments to the heavy iron engine sitting behind them. The cabins were square, offering generous headroom for passengers wearing top hats. The fenders were separate arching covers that sat suspended above the wheels, unconnected to the main body of the vehicle. In these early years, there was no need to slip quietly through the air because the air was not yet a barrier. The speeds were low. The roads were rough and unpaved, demanding slow, careful journeys. At 20 or 30 miles per hour, the atmosphere parts easily, forgiving the flat, unyielding shapes of early steel and brass. The engineers of this era were not thinking about the invisible currents of the wind. They were focused on the simple mechanical miracle of forward motion. They were focused on making the pistons turn, on making the gears mesh, on keeping the oil flowing through the heavy brass fittings. Design, in this era, was an exercise in architecture, not aerodynamics. Cars were drawn with rulers and T-squares on large wooden drafting tables. The shapes were dictated by the mechanical components that needed to be housed within them. The radiator sat at the front, flat and exposed to catch the breeze. The engine sat behind it, a long, heavy block of cast iron. The passenger compartment sat high above the chassis, keeping the occupants away from the dust and the noise of the road beneath them. Every part was distinct. Every component served its singular purpose, visible and unashamed. But as the years passed, the world began to change. The roads were paved, stretching out into long, unbroken ribbons of smooth tarmac. And as the roads smoothed out, the engines grew stronger. The quiet chugging of early cylinders gave way to the steady, powerful hum of larger displacements. Speeds began to rise, 40 miles per hour, then 50, then 60. And as the speed of the automobile increased, the engineers began to notice something. They noticed an invisible hand pushing back against their creations. They realized that the air, which had once felt so light and yielding, was actually a dense, heavy fluid. And the faster a car tried to push through this fluid, the harder the fluid fought back. The upright windshields, the flat grills, the separated fenders, they were catching the wind like sails. The invisible currents of air were wrapping around the sharp edges of the cabins, creating turbulent, chaotic wake behind the cars, dragging them backward, holding them down. This invisible resistance, this quiet struggle between metal and atmosphere, is what engineers call aerodynamic drag. And discovering this drag was the very first step in the long, slow journey toward the smooth, unified shapes we see resting quietly in our driveways today. The wind had spoken, and the engineers had finally begun to listen. As the realization settled into the minds of engineers that air was not an empty void, but a heavy, invisible fluid, the entire philosophy of automotive design began to gently shift. If a car was to move through this fluid with grace, it could no longer be shaped like a carriage. It had to be shaped like the things in nature that had already mastered the art of slipping through resistance. It had to look to the birds, to the fish, and most importantly, to the simple falling droplet of water. In physics, the teardrop is nature's most perfectly aerodynamic shape. It is softly rounded at the front to gently part the air, and it tapers into a long, smooth point at the rear, allowing the air to close back together without creating a turbulent, pulling wake. In the 1920s and 30s, a quiet movement began among a few visionary engineers. They put down their straight rulers and began to draw sweeping, continuous arcs. They began to imagine cars that looked like teardrops resting on wheels. This era saw the birth of vehicles that looked utterly alien to the drivers of the time. Cars like the Rumpler Tropfenwagen in Germany, and later the Chrysler Airflow in America. These machines featured sloping hoods, curved windshields, and headlights that were beginning to sink into the bodywork, hiding from the wind. The rear of these cars swept down in a long, graceful curve. They were quieter on the inside, and they moved with a newfound efficiency. But these early teardrop cars were often seen as too radical, too unusual for a public that was still accustomed to the upright dignity of the traditional automobile. Yet the seeds of change had been planted. The invisible hand of the wind had made its demands known, and the engineers knew there was no turning back. To truly understand the wind, designers needed a way to see it. They needed a place where the air could be controlled, slowed down, and carefully observed. This necessity led to the widespread adoption of the wind tunnel in automotive design, a development that would quietly dictate the shape of every car built from that moment on. Imagine, if you will, the peaceful, clinical atmosphere of a mid-century wind tunnel. It is a long, sealed chamber, built with smooth walls and a massive, quiet fan positioned at one end. In the center of the chamber rests a scale model of a car, painstakingly sculpted by hand from warm brown clay. As the fan begins to turn, generating a steady, constant breeze, the engineers introduce thin ribbons of white smoke into the airstream. In the dim light of the testing room, the engineers watch patiently as the smoke glides toward the clay model. They watch how it hits the front bumper. They observe whether the white ribbons flow smoothly over the curved roofline, or if they break apart into chaotic, swirling eddies behind the rear window. Where the smoke swirls, there is drag. There is inefficiency, there is noise. And so, with quiet determination, a designer will step into the chamber, take a small metal tool, and shave a millimeter of clay from the roofline. They smooth the transition from the glass to the metal. They soften the angle of the trunk. Then they step back, turn the fan on once more, and watch the smoke. This slow, meditative process of shaping and testing gave rise to a mathematical measurement that now governs the automotive world. It is called the drag coefficient. It is a simple number that represents how easily an object moves through the air. A flat, upright box has a high drag coefficient. A teardrop has a very low one. Lowering this number became the quiet obsession of engineers around the globe. Every fraction of a point shaved off the drag coefficient meant less fuel burned, less wind noise in the cabin, and a smoother, more peaceful journey for the passengers inside. As the decades drifted by, the separate protruding elements of the car began to disappear, swallowed up by the pursuit of this aerodynamic ideal. The large, separate fenders that once sat above the wheels were gently absorbed into the main body of the car, creating a single continuous flank of smooth steel. This was known as envelope styling, and it transformed the car from a collection of parts into a single, cohesive shape. The exposed hinges, the upright door handles, the protruding rain gutters, one by one, they were smoothed over, tucked away, or removed entirely. The car was no longer a carriage. It had become a fuselage. It was a capsule designed to protect its occupants from the elements, while disturbing the atmosphere as little as possible. The wind had become the UN-scene sculptor, its invisible current slowly wearing away the sharp edges of automotive history, guiding the industry toward a shared, undeniable logic. The pursuit of the perfect aerodynamic shape was, for many years, a quiet, almost academic endeavor. It was a goal driven by the pure mathematical satisfaction of lowering the drag coefficient and slipping more efficiently through the air. But, as the 20th century wore on, the world outside the wind tunnels began to change. The gentle pursuit of efficiency was suddenly accelerated by the very real pressures of global economics. In the 1970s, the world experienced a sudden and dramatic fuel crisis. The abundant flowing energy that had powered the large, heavy, angular cars of the previous decades was suddenly scarce. The long, flat hoods and upright grills that had defined a generation of design were no longer just aerodynamically inefficient, they were economically unsustainable. The wind tunnel was no longer just a place for theoretical refinement. It became the most important room in the design studio. Engineers were tasked with doing more with less. They had to extract every possible mile from a single drop of fuel, and the easiest way to do that was to stop fighting the air. The transition was slow but undeniable. The sharp, square corners of the 70s gradually softened into the rounded jelly bean shapes of the 1990s. Look closely at the sedans from this era, the Ford Taurus, the Audi 80, and you will see the physical manifestation of a world trying to save energy. The windshields laid back, resting at shallower angles. The headlights were mounted flush with the bodywork, covered by smooth, clear lenses, so the air could pass over them without catching. The edges of the bumpers gently rolled underneath the car, managing the turbulent air that flowed close to the road surface. But aerodynamics was not the only invisible force shaping these modern machines. In the background, away from the drafting tables, another quiet revolution was taking place. It was the rise of global safety regulations. For the first half of automotive history, a car was primarily designed to protect the people sitting inside of it. The structures were rigid, the bumpers were made of heavy solid chrome. But as our understanding of physics and human biology deepened, engineers realized that a rigid car is not a safe car. When a rigid object stops suddenly, the energy of that impact has nowhere to go but into the passengers. To solve this, engineers began to design cars that were meant to sacrifice themselves. They developed crumple zones, sections of the front and rear of the vehicle that are mathematically designed to fold, crush, and absorb the violent energy of an impact, slowing the deceleration of the cabin. But to build an effective crumple zone, you need space. You need a specific distance between the front bumper and the engine block. This requirement began to quietly dictate the proportions of every car on the road. The front overhangs, the distance from the front wheel to the tip of the bumper, grew longer and deeper across all manufacturers. Then came a new, profoundly important consideration: the safety of the people outside the car. In the early 2000s, regulations were introduced to protect pedestrians in the event of an accident. These rules required that the front of a car be designed to minimize injury. The sharp, upright grills and the low, flat hoods of the past were deemed too dangerous. To comply with these new standards, the architecture of the modern car had to change once again. The front bumpers were raised, providing a larger, softer surface area. The hoods were lifted higher, creating a necessary gap of empty space between the thin sheet metal of the hood and the hard, unyielding top of the engine block beneath it. This gap acts as a cushion, allowing the hood to flex and absorb an impact. This single regulation, a quiet rule written in the name of human safety, is perhaps the most significant reason why the front ends of modern cars all share a similar, blunt, slightly elevated profile. Whether it is a compact hatchback in Tokyo or a large SUV in Chicago, the underlying physics of pedestrian safety require the same mathematical solution. The designers are no longer just sketching what looks beautiful. They are sketching what the laws of physics and the laws of the road demand. When you combine the need to pierce the air efficiently with the need to protect the human body, the possible shapes for an automobile become very narrow. The wind tunnel dictates the smooth, sloping roofline and the tapered rear. The safety regulations dictate the blunt, elevated front end, and the long, energy-absorbing overhangs. It is a formula. And when every manufacturer in the world is solving the exact same formula, using the exact same wind tunnels and the exact same safety data, the answers they arrive at will naturally look the same. And so we arrive at the present day. We stand in that misty parking lot at dusk, looking out over rows of modern vehicles. They are sleek. They are quiet. They are incredibly complex capsules of technology, moving silently through a world that is moving faster than ever. It is easy to feel a sense of loss for the past. It is easy to look at the unified aerodynamic shapes of today and miss the wild, unapologetic variety of the 20th century. We miss the dramatic tail fins that soared into the air for no practical reason other than the sheer joy of design. We miss the sharp, chrome-laden grills that caught the sunlight. We miss the days when a car could look like anything, simply because it didn't have to look like something specific. But as the shadows lengthen and the streetlights flicker on, there is a different kind of beauty to be found in the uniformity of the modern automobile. It is not the loud, expressive beauty of art. It is the quiet, satisfying beauty of a problem that has been solved. The cars of today look similar because they are the physical embodiment of an answer. They are the result of over a century of human intelligence slowly learning to cooperate with the natural world. They are the product of millions of hours spent in quiet wind tunnels, watching white smoke gently flow over warm clay. They are the result of a profound dedication to preserving human life, of engineering metal to yield and fold so that people do not have to. When you see a modern car slip quietly down a foggy highway, you are not seeing a lack of creativity. You are seeing a machine that has finally learned to respect the wind. You are seeing a shape that has been polished by the relentless currents of aerodynamics, smoothed by the demands of efficiency, and elevated by the noble pursuit of safety. They are like the smooth, rounded stones you find resting at the bottom of a quiet river. Before they were placed in the water, those stones might have been jagged. They might have been wildly different from one another, but the river is patient. The water flows over them day after day, year after year, gently wearing away the sharp edges, slowly erasing the resistance. Eventually, the stones all begin to look the same. But they are not boring. They are simply perfect for the environment they live in. The modern automobile is a stone that has been shaped by the river of air. It is a testament to our quiet surrender to the laws of physics. As the night settles in and the last of the cars fade into the distance, their red tail lights disappearing into the mist, we can appreciate the quiet journey that brought us here, from the upright, struggling carriages of the past to the smooth, silent teardrops of today. It is a story of progress, a story of harmony, and a story that continues to unfold quietly as we drift through the dark, resting safely inside the machines we have built. Rest now. The roads are clear, the wind is quiet, and the journey is smooth. Good night.